In the pre-dawn darkness of December 18, 1944, the roads cutting through the Ardennes forests near Stavelot lay frozen beneath a hard skin of ice. The temperature had dropped below 10 degrees Fahrenheit during the night, and the narrow Belgian lanes, hemmed in by skeletal trees and snow-dusted embankments, had turned into treacherous corridors of frost and shadow. Along these rural arteries, the lead elements of Kampfgruppe paper advanced with ruthless determination. Comprising armored infantry, tanks, and supply half-tracks of the 1st SS Panzer Division. Leibstandard Adolf Hitler. Paper's formation had been spearheading Hitler's last great gamble in the West, the Ardennes counteroffensive, known to history as the Battle of the Bulge. Paper's column was one of the most formidable strike forces assembled by the German army that winter, over 100 armored vehicles, including Tiger II heavy tanks, Panzer IVs, and dozens of SD, KFC, 251 half-tracks carrying veteran Panzer Grenadiers who had fought in Russia and France. They were confident men, molded by years of mechanized warfare and accustomed to victory bought through speed, surprise, and brutal efficiency. As the black bulk of their vehicles crawled forward through the dim forest light, they believed that nothing short of a heavy tank force could stand in their path. The Hanomag-built SD, KFC, 251 half-track had long been a symbol of German battlefield mobility and tactical confidence. With its sloped 8mm armor plates, open-topped crew compartment, and reliable Maybach engine, the vehicle had earned its reputation across every front of the war, from the sweeping steppes of Ukraine to the burning sands of North Africa. For years, it had survived small arms fire, shrapnel, and even light anti-tank weapons that older Allied forces had fielded. German infantry trusted their half-tracks. They were both transport and shield, capable of withstanding rifle bullets and providing the Panzer Grenadiers with the protection needed to close with enemy positions. But by late 1944, the battlefield was changing faster than most German field officers realized. The Allied armies had evolved. Their reconnaissance vehicles were no longer lightly armed runabouts meant to observe and retreat. Instead, they had begun to carry teeth, small, fast, and unexpectedly lethal. As Kampfgruppe paper's vanguard approached the outskirts of Stavelot, reports filtered in of scattered American reconnaissance elements withdrawing from the roads ahead. German radio chatter dismissed these contacts as token resistance. Like Aufklärung, light scouts, likely part of the U.S. 7th Armored or 30th Infantry Division, were thought to be falling back in disorder. The Germans were accustomed to such encounters. American scouts would probe, observe, and vanish at the first sign of armor. Yet that morning, one of those light units refused to retreat. On a small crossroads outside Stavelot, an American M8 Greyhound, a six-wheeled armored car, crewed by 6 men, sat quietly, engine idling in the cold. Painted olive-drab, its narrow profile barely distinguishable against the snow, the vehicle was the eyes and ears of its division. The M8 had been designed not for battle but for reconnaissance. Officially, it carried a 37mm M6 gun and a coaxial .30 caliber Browning machine gun. The gun, a leftover from early war designs, was often derided by both Allied and Axis soldiers as underpowered against serious armor. German intelligence reports had repeatedly categorized it as obsolete, useful only against light vehicles or infantry. That assumption would prove fatal. Staff Sergeant Robert Harper, commanding the M8 that morning, had orders to delay any German advance along the Stavelot road until heavier American forces could regroup. His Greyhound's crew had fought in France, where the vehicle's speed and agility had made it an ideal recon platform. But here, in the confined roads of the Ardennes, speed mattered less than positioning. Harper positioned his M8 behind a low stone wall, its turret just peeking over the frost-bitten hedge line. His gunner, Corporal Eugene Fields, adjusted the elevation of the 37mm cannon and waited. Moments later, the distant rumble of engines grew into a mechanical roar. Through the periscope, Harper could see the lead German half-tracks approaching, their headlights dimmed but the metallic shapes glinting in the faint morning light. There were no tanks visible yet, just the familiar silhouette of the Hanomag troop carriers, their armored noses cutting through the mist. For the Germans, it was a routine advance. The lead half-track carried a squad of panzer grenadiers armed with MP-40 submachine guns and Kar 98K rifles. They expected perhaps mines, or a sniper, maybe an artillery shell. But not this. As the column neared the crossroads, the first M8 round fired. The Greyhound's 37mm gun barked sharply, the recoil jolting the light frame of the vehicle. The armor-piercing shell, traveling at over 2,800 feet per second, struck the lead half-track just below the driver's visor. The thin frontal armor, only 8mm thick, offered no resistance. The round punched through, detonating inside the compartment, killing the driver and co-driver instantly, and igniting the fuel tank. Flames burst upward from the open troop bay, catching the uniforms of the panzer grenadiers in back. Before they could react, Harper ordered a second shot. The second shell hit the following vehicle square in the side, shattering its engine block and spraying shrapnel across the snow. Within seconds, 2 of the German half-tracks were burning wrecks, and the once confident soldiers of Kampfgruppe Paper's vanguard were diving into the frozen ditches for cover. What followed was confusion and disbelief. German radio operators scrambled to report the contact, assuming they had encountered hidden anti-tank guns or a self-propelled gun. The idea that a lightly armored American scout car had destroyed 2 half. In hindsight, the destruction of those 2 half-tracks may seem tactically insignificant compared to the scale of the Ardennes offensive. Yet within that localized engagement lay the essence of modern mechanized warfare: knowledge, perception, and adaptability. The German crews operated under an outdated belief that only heavy armor and high-caliber guns dictated battlefield power. The Americans, meanwhile, had learned to weaponize mobility, speed, and surprise. The M8 Greyhound, dismissed by German analysts as a mere reconnaissance car, became a lethal ambusher precisely because it was underestimated. In the fog of the Ardennes, where visibility was low and roads were narrow, the smaller vehicle could strike unseen and vanish before retaliation. The psychological consequences of such encounters rippled through German ranks. In Paper's command post that evening, officers debated whether they had stumbled upon a new American anti-tank weapon. The intelligence reports insisted the M8's gun was ineffective beyond 400 meters, yet field reports contradicted that completely. As Paper's force pushed deeper into Belgium, orders were quietly adjusted. Half-tracks were to avoid engaging unknown armored cars unless accompanied by tanks. It was an unspoken admission that the Americans, scouts, were not as harmless as once believed. The Stavelot encounter also revealed something deeper about the shifting tides of industrial warfare. By December 1944, the United States had produced nearly 9,000 M8 Greyhounds, churning them out from Ford's St. Paul factory at a pace unimaginable in Germany's bombed-out industrial centers. For every armored car destroyed in battle, 2 more could be shipped to the front within weeks. The Germans, on the other hand, were suffering a logistical collapse. Their factories were under relentless Allied bombing, their transport lines were crippled by fuel shortages. The Hanomag half-track that had once symbolized the Wehrmacht's mobility was now a relic, barely sustainable in mass production. In contrast, the Americans fielded reconnaissance vehicles in every division, saturating the battlefield with fast, lightly armed units capable of striking with unexpected force. The confrontation near Stavelot was, therefore, more than a random skirmish. It was a microcosm of the war's final phase. It demonstrated how misjudgment of enemy capabilities, compounded by the arrogance of experience, could undo even elite formations. The Panzer Grenadiers of Kampfgruppe Paper had survived countless engagements across Europe, but they could not survive outdated assumptions. When Harper's M8 fired those 2 37mm rounds, he did more than destroy 2 vehicles, he shattered a myth. From that day forward, German reconnaissance units learned to treat every American scout car as a potential killer, every silhouette in the mist as a possible ambush waiting to erupt. The M8 Greyhound, once seen as a harmless observer, had earned its reputation as the hunter. The destruction of 2 half-tracks near Stavelot on that frozen December morning might have seemed like an isolated event amid the chaos of the Ardennes offensive, but for the German command, it soon became a case study in a deeper systemic failure, a failure of perception, intelligence, and adaptation. Within 48 hours of the engagement, fragments of reports reached the headquarters of the 6th Panzer Army, describing American light armored cars capable of disabling or destroying standard German troop carriers. Initial reaction among the staff officers was disbelief. The M8 Greyhound had long been catalogued in German intelligence manuals as a reconnaissance vehicle of negligible combat value. Its 37mm gun was described as light Bewaffnung, light armament, effective only against unarmored vehicles. Yet the field reports from Paper's Spearhead painted a different picture. Multiple half-tracks destroyed, German infantry shaken, and Panzer Grenadiers reluctant to advance without tank support. The contrast between doctrine and battlefield reality could no longer be ignored. German military intelligence, the Frontier West, FHW, had once prided itself on meticulous detail. Its pre-invasion analyses of Allied equipment had been thorough and, in many cases, accurate. However, by late 1944, the system was collapsing under the weight of Allied deception, destroyed communication lines, and the sheer pace of technological evolution. Reports from the front often traveled slowly, filtered through layers of bureaucracy before they reached the analysts who wrote the manuals. The result was an intelligence machine operating months behind reality. In the case of the M8 Greyhound, that gap proved devastating. German officers were still relying on data gathered in 1943 from captured vehicles in North Africa, early models that had fought under entirely different conditions. Those assessments had concluded that the M8's gun was ineffective beyond 400 meters and incapable of penetrating anything thicker than 20 millimeters of armor. What the reports failed to consider was how the Americans had learned to exploit the vehicle's speed, accuracy, and ambush potential. As Paper's units regrouped after Stavelot, his staff officers sent forward reconnaissance patrols to assess the threat. These patrols began to note a recurring pattern. Wherever American armored cars appeared, half-tracks tended to suffer disproportionate losses. At first, they suspected minefields or hidden anti-tank guns. But closer inspection of wrecks revealed small, neat penetration holes, too narrow for 57mm or 75mm shells, and too clean for shaped charges. Oberleutnant Franz Steiner, one of Paper's junior intelligence officers, personally examined the remains of a destroyed Hanomag near the Amblev River. His after-action report, later recovered in Allied archives, described his astonishment. The entry hole is precise, diameter approximately 37 millimeters. The exit side is torn outward. The armor has been penetrated completely. This cannot be from an anti-tank rifle or mine. Steiner's analysis was correct, and it contradicted everything his manual had told him. In that moment of forensic observation, he realized that the American Scout gun, far from being obsolete, was perfectly engineered for killing the very vehicles Germany depended upon for infantry transport. The incident triggered a small wave of recalibration within the German command structure, though it came too late to influence the outcome of the Ardennes offensive. Orders circulated among Paper's subordinate commanders. Reconnaissance units were to treat all American armored cars as potential combat threats. Half-tracks were instructed to avoid engaging at close range and to coordinate movements with accompanying tanks or assault guns. These orders marked an ironic reversal. For years, the Germans had used their own reconnaissance forces, the SD, KFZ, 222 and 234 series armored cars, to exploit precisely the same tactics now being used against them. In a sense, the Americans had learned from the master and refined the art of light armor warfare into something the Germans could no longer match industrially or tactically. But the issue ran deeper than tactics. It exposed the hollowing out of German intelligence as a functional arm of command. By December 1944, the Third Reich's war machine had grown increasingly delusional. Hitler himself had overruled many intelligence assessments that contradicted his ideological conviction that German willpower could overcome material inferiority. Analysts who dared to highlight Allied production advantages were sidelined or ignored. The result was a catastrophic misreading of the Western Front. When the Battle of the Bulge began, Hitler and his staff believed that American morale was weak, that their tanks were sluggish, and that their reconnaissance formations posed no real threat to German armored columns. Yet in the cold forests of Belgium, it was the Americans, weak scout cars that were punching above their weight, outmaneuvering, outproducing, and outlasting the Wehrmacht's most elite formations. Meanwhile, American intelligence and design philosophy were moving in the opposite direction. The M8 Greyhound had been designed by Ford's engineers in 1942 as a fast reconnaissance vehicle, but field reports from North Africa and Italy had shaped its evolution into a flexible combat platform. The crews had discovered that its 37mm gun, though ineffective against heavy tanks, was devastating against trucks, half-tracks, and field positions. American doctrine encouraged initiative. Recon crews were trained to engage targets of opportunity if the odds favored them. They were not bound by rigid hierarchy or paralyzed by fear of disobedience, as so many German junior officers had become in 1944. This difference in military culture amplified the Greyhound's effectiveness. Each small M8 unit could act independently, striking quickly and withdrawing before the enemy could react. By contrast, German half-track units relied on strict coordination with tanks and artillery, a system that broke down completely when fuel shortages and communication delays set in during the Ardennes campaign. The industrial disparity added another layer of tragedy to the German predicament. The Americans produced M8s in staggering numbers, 8,923 units by the end of 1944. While German factories struggled to manufacture even a fraction of that in equivalent vehicles. The SD, KFC 251, though a marvel of engineering in its early years, was now suffering from chronic shortages of steel, rubber, and skilled labor. Many were built with substandard materials or repaired from battle-damaged wrecks scavenged from the Eastern Front. As the Wehrmacht's quality declined, American quantity filled the void. By the time Paper's men reached Stamont, the gap in mobility and reliability between the two armies had become a chasm. The Greyhound could drive 350 kilometers on a single tank of fuel and required minimal maintenance compared to the half-track's complex drive system. In winter conditions, this difference translated directly into survival and success. American recon teams kept moving while German vehicles froze, broke down, or ran out of fuel on the roadside. Paper's officers tried to adapt on the fly. At Stamont and La Gleize, where the fighting intensified between December 19th and 22nd, they began using captured American vehicles for deception and reconnaissance. Yet this improvisation only underscored their desperation. German reports from the field lamented the fact that their own recon assets were either destroyed or immobilized. "We have lost the freedom of movement," one Panzer Grenadier officer wrote. "Even our scouts must hide." The once proud doctrine of blitzkrieg, based on the synergy of armor, infantry, and fast reconnaissance, was collapsing under the combined weight of fuel shortages and Allied adaptability. The small M8 Greyhound, produced in an American factory half a world away, had become a symbol of that imbalance. As word of the Stavelot incident spread, it took on a mythic quality among German troops. Soldiers in the 1st SS Panzer Division began to refer to American armored cars simply as Jagdwagen, hunter wagons. It was half joke, half warning. Whenever a lone vehicle was spotted on the horizon, commanders hesitated before advancing. The psychological shift was subtle but unmistakable. The Germans, who had once prided themselves on aggression and initiative, were now reacting defensively to the presence of vehicles they had once dismissed. Paper's radio logs from December 20th include multiple orders to avoid unnecessary contact with enemy light armor. In military terms, this was a quiet acknowledgement of defeat, not a defeat in battle, but in mindset. The hunter had become the hunted. German intelligence officers back in Cologne and Koblenz worked feverishly to update their recognition guides. Revised bulletins began to circulate, noting the M8's armor-piercing capabilities and recommending engagement distances beyond 500 meters. However, by the time these documents reached the front, the situation had already deteriorated beyond repair. The Bulge offensive was grinding to a halt, and Paper's once mighty column was running out of fuel. In the frozen streets of Stamont and the narrow valleys of La Gleize, the surviving half-tracks were abandoned or destroyed. Many were knocked out not by tanks or aircraft but by American reconnaissance teams using the same tactics that had proven effective at Stavelot: flanking ambushes, rapid fire, and quick withdrawal. The Germans had no effective countermeasure. Their armored cars, the SD, KFC, 234s, were too few and too precious to risk, and their tanks could not maneuver freely in the confined terrain. The tragedy of the German intelligence blind spot extended beyond the Ardennes. It symbolized a broader failure to adapt that plagued the Wehrmacht in the war's final phase. The same arrogance that led them to underestimate the 37mm gun had caused them to dismiss other Allied weapons as well: the bazooka, the M10 tank destroyer, even the ubiquitous Sherman tank, which they continued to view as inferior despite its overwhelming numerical and logistical advantage. The cumulative effect of these misjudgments was catastrophic. By overvaluing their own experience and underestimating their enemy's innovation, the Germans rendered themselves strategically blind. The M8 Greyhound's success was not simply a matter of ballistics. It was a triumph of adaptability over dogma. For the Americans, the Battle of the Bulge was a crucible of endurance. Units like Harper's reconnaissance platoon became unsung heroes of the campaign, operating on the periphery yet shaping its outcomes through swift, decisive actions. Their ambushes and delaying tactics bought time for the main U.S. forces to reorganize and counterattack. Every hour gained allowed engineers to blow bridges, artillery to reposition, and infantry to fortify key towns. In this way, the M8 Greyhound played a strategic role far beyond its modest design. It was the connective tissue of the American defense, linking sectors, relaying intelligence, and striking when opportunity arose. Against an enemy accustomed to dictating the tempo of battle, that flexibility proved devastating. In the post-war years, Allied historians would often overlook the contribution of the Greyhound in favor of more glamorous tanks and aircraft. Yet among veterans of both sides, its impact was remembered vividly. German survivors of Kampfgruppe paper, interviewed in the 1950s, consistently mentioned their shock at encountering the M8. "It was small, but it bit hard," recalled one former Panzer Grenadier. "You didn't see it until it fired. Then it was too late." For them, the encounter represented the moment when the myth of German invincibility finally cracked under the weight of industrial reality. For the Americans, it was a validation of their doctrine that initiative and resourcefulness could offset even the enemy's superior firepower. As the smoke of the Ardennes cleared in early 1945, the lessons of Stavelot, Stilmont, and Log-Lees were written into the evolving doctrine of mechanized warfare. Reconnaissance would never again be viewed merely as observation. It had become an instrument of direct combat, capable of shaping battles and altering operational tempo. The Germans had learned this truth the hard way, and by the time they recognized it, their war was already lost. The M8 Greyhound, born as a scout, had ended the war as a symbol of the intelligence failure that doomed the Wehrmacht's last great offensive.